August 15, 1985. Miguel Santos had protected Griselda Blanco for 15 years, never missed a shift, never questioned an order, never let anyone get within 10 feet of the Queen of Cocaine. That's exactly why the Ochoa brothers paid him $100,000 to take a smoke break at 11:47 p.m. Miguel walked outside the Mutiny Hotel, lit a cigarette, counted to 60. The gunshots started at 11:48. What happened next became Miami legend. The newspapers reported Griselda's death. The DEA closed her file. The cartels divided her territory. But 3 bodies were found in that hotel room, and none of them belonged to the godmother. For 38 years, Miguel thought he'd gotten away with betrayal. Then his granddaughter got a full college scholarship from a foundation that didn't exist, with a return address that led to a flower shop in Medellin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miguel's hands trembled as he set the scholarship letter on his kitchen table, the official letterhead catching the fluorescent light. Elena bounced around the cramped kitchen of their homestead duplex, her excitement infectious, despite the ice forming in his chest. Abuelo, can you believe it? Full ride to University of Miami. She spun around, her dark hair whipping across her face, the same face that reminded him daily of his son Carlos, gone 3 years now to a fentanyl overdose that started with pills after a construction accident. The counselor said I was one of only 5 recipients nationwide. The Esperanza Foundation, they must have really believed in my essay about overcoming adversity. Miguel forced a smile while his mind raced. Esperanza. Hope. Griselda always did have a twisted sense of humor. The foundation's address burned in his memory. Floreria La Mariposa, Carrera 45 #52-18, Medellin, Colombia. He'd driven past that flower shop 100 times in the early 80s when he accompanied Griselda on supply runs. Back then, it was owned by her cousin Rosa, a woman who spoke only in whispers and kept A38 hidden beneath the cash register. I start orientation in 3 weeks, Elena continued, already planning her escape from this life of struggling to pay rent with the meager profits from Santos Auto Repair. I can finally study pre-med like I always dreamed. We won't have to worry about money anymore, Abuelo. I can take care of us. The guilt twisted deeper. Elena had been his anchor since Carlos died, the only pure thing left in his world. She worked part-time at the grocery store, maintained a 4.2 GPA, and never complained about their hand-to-mouth existence. She deserved this scholarship, but not from the foundation offering it. Miguel's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Answer it, Miguel. The voice on the other end was aged but unmistakable, carrying the same steel that once commanded armies of sicarios. I know you're there. His blood turned to slush. Griselda. Elena stopped mid-sentence, noticing his expression. Who is it, Abuelo? He waved her away, stepping onto the back patio where his tools hung on pegboards and half-finished car parts rusted in the Miami humidity. The evening air felt suffocating. You thought I was dead. It wasn't a question. 38 years, Miguel. 38 years I've watched you play the grieving bodyguard who barely escaped with his life. Very convincing performance. How did I survive? Or how did I find you? Her laugh carried decades of patience and planning. The second question is easier. I never lost you, querido. I know about your son's addiction, his overdose, your granddaughter's grades, her college applications. I know you take blood pressure medication and haven't slept through the night since 1985. Miguel gripped the patio railing. Through the kitchen window, he watched Elena reading the scholarship documents, her face glowing with possibilities he was about to destroy. What do you want? Justice has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. Griselda's voice carried the same calm she used before ordering executions. But first, your granddaughter needs her education, don't you think? Such a bright girl, such potential. It would be tragic if something happened to interfere with her studies. The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. She's innocent. She has nothing to do with what happened. Neither did my children when the Ochoa brothers tried to kill them in their beds. Neither did my mother when she had to flee Colombia because of the war that followed my supposed death. The temperature in Griselda's voice dropped. but we both know innocence is a luxury in our world. Miguel watched Elena through the window, already imagining herself in lecture halls and laboratories, building a future beyond the cycle of violence and poverty that had defined his family for generations. There are others, Griselda continued. Others who betrayed me that night. The Ochoa brothers are long dead, of course. I handled them personally. But there were policemen who took money, DEA agents who looked the other way, politicians who signed off on the operation. A whole network of corruption that thought my death would bury their sins. What do you want me to do? Help me collect what's owed, starting with the men who paid you, their sons, their partners, their banks and businesses, and blood. Her voice carried the weight of decades spent planning revenge. Elena's scholarship is just the beginning, Miguel. Consider it a signing bonus for your return to my employment. The patio door slid open behind him. Elena's voice carried concern and excitement in equal measure. Abuelo, the foundation wants to schedule a meeting tomorrow. They're sending a representative to discuss my academic goals. Miguel met his granddaughter's hopeful eyes while Griselda's laughter echoed through the phone, a sound like bones breaking in expensive silk. Tell her yes, Griselda whispered. Tell her you'll both be there. After all, family reunions are so important, don't you think? The line went dead, leaving Miguel staring at Elena's radiant smile while calculating how many people were going to die. Miguel's hands shook as he slipped the phone into his pocket, the weight of Griselda's words settling over him like concrete. Elena stood in the doorway, her excitement radiating through the humid evening air, completely unaware that her future had just become a weapon in a war she never knew existed. Of course, mija, he managed, his voice hoarse. We'll meet with them. Elena's smile could have powered the entire block. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his thick waist, the same way she had as a little girl when nightmares woke her, back when Carlos was still alive, still clean, still believing he could break the family curse. Miguel held her close, inhaling the strawberry scent of her shampoo, memorizing the warmth of her trust. I can't believe this is real, she whispered against his chest. After everything we've been through, it's like someone's finally looking out for us. Miguel's throat tightened. Someone was looking out for them. The same someone who once fed a man to her pet alligators for skimming cocaine profits. The same someone who'd had children killed for their father's debts. The irony tasted like battery acid on his tongue. Tell me about this foundation representative, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Elena pulled back, her dark eyes, Carlos's eyes, sparkling. Her name is Isabel Vargas. She's flying in from Miami tomorrow afternoon. They're putting her up at the Mayfair Hotel downtown. She paused, studying his face. Abuelo, are you okay? You look pale. Miguel forced another smile while his mind cataloged everything he knew about the Mayfair. Griselda always preferred expensive hotels, easier to control the environment, harder for enemies to predict her movements. She'd once tortured an informant in the penthouse suite of the Mutiny Hotel, while a charity gala played music 3 floors below. Just tired, pequeña. It's been a long day at the shop. The lie came easily, worn smooth by decades of practice. Miguel had built his life and homestead on carefully constructed lies about his past, his nightmares, the real reason he'd moved to Florida's ass end with a toddler grandson and grief heavier than the humidity. The neighbors knew him as a quiet mechanic who fixed their cars and kept to himself. They didn't know about the scar on his shoulder from a Medellin shootout, or the way he still checked locks 3 times before bed, or the loaded .45 he kept under his workbench. Elena bounced on her toes, unable to contain her energy. I should call Maria and tell her. She's not going to believe this. A full ride, abuelo. No more working double shifts, no more worrying about rent. I can focus completely on studying. As she disappeared back into the house, chattering excitedly into her phone, Miguel remained on the patio. The evening air carried the familiar sounds of their neighborhood. Children playing, television programs in Spanish and English, the distant hum of traffic on US 1, normal sounds of a normal life he'd fought 15 years to build. He'd bought this duplex with cash, saved from 12-hour days under car hoods, his hands finally clean of blood. Elena's bedroom was barely larger than a closet, but she'd never complained. She'd transformed it into a shrine to her academic ambitions, walls covered with honor roll certificates, science fair ribbons, acceptance letters from schools they could never afford. Now one of them had become affordable, courtesy of the woman he'd betrayed. Miguel walked to his tool shed, muscle memory guiding him to the loose floorboard in the back corner. His fingers found the wrapped oilcloth, heavy with the weight of his old life. Inside, $50,000 in weathered hundreds, 3 fake passports with his face, and a Colt, .45 that hadn't been fired in 23 years. Emergency supplies for a man who'd never stopped looking over his shoulder. The money represented 5 years of saving every spare dollar, insurance against the day his past caught up. He'd always planned to give it to Elena for college, but that was before Griselda's ghost had risen to make her own educational investments. Through the kitchen window, he could see Elena pacing while she talked, her free hand gesturing wildly. She looked so much like her father at that age, before the accident, before the pills, before Miguel had watched his son waste away in hospital beds and rehabilitation centers that insurance wouldn't cover. Carlos had died owing money to dealers who weren't interested in payment plans, and Miguel had paid those debts with cash from this same hiding place, buying his granddaughter safety with bills that smelled like motor oil and regret. Now that safety was an illusion. Griselda's web had been spinning around them for God knew how long, patient as a spider, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself. Elena's scholarship wasn't generosity, it was bait. The meeting tomorrow wasn't about academic goals, it was about collecting a debt 38 years overdue. Miguel rewrapped the gun and money, his hands steady despite the tremors in his chest. Tomorrow he would sit across from someone connected to Griselda's network and smile while they discussed Elena's bright future. He would play the grateful grandfather while calculating exit strategies and wondering which of his neighbors might be watching, reporting, waiting. But tonight, he would sit with Elena and pretend to share her joy, memorizing her laughter before the war began. Miguel stepped back into the house, sealing away his weapons and emergency cash with the same practiced care he'd once used to clean Griselda's guns. Elena had finished her call and stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes that didn't need washing, a nervous habit she'd inherited from her father. The scholarship letter lay spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. "Maria thinks I should buy new clothes for the meeting," Elena said without looking up, her voice carrying forced casualness. "Professional ones. Maybe we could go to that outlet mall in Kendall?" Miguel heard the question beneath her words. They hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years, not since Carlos died and left them with nothing but hospital bills and funeral costs. Elena's wardrobe consisted of hand-me-downs from the church and clearance items they found at Goodwill. The idea of buying something new, something professional, represented hope for a future beyond their current struggles. "Of course, Mia," he said, calculating how much of his emergency fund he could access without raising suspicion. "We'll find you something perfect." Elena's smile was worth every lie he'd ever told to keep her safe. The evening passed in a blur of celebration and planning. They ordered pizza, a luxury reserved for birthdays and report cards, and Elena spread her college applications across the coffee table, showing Miguel acceptance letters from schools they'd never seriously considered because of cost. University of Miami, Florida International, even Florida State. Dreams that had been theoretical suddenly felt tangible. "I want to study pre-med," she said, her voice carrying the same determination Miguel remembered from her childhood, when she'd announced her intention to become a doctor after watching him treat Carlos's construction injuries with nothing but ice and ibuprofen. Maybe specialize in addiction medicine. Help people like... She trailed off, unwilling to speak her father's name aloud. Miguel's chest tightened. Even Elena's academic ambitions were shaped by the family's cycles of violence and destruction. She wanted to heal the same kind of wounds that had killed her father, unaware that her grandfather had spent 15 years creating similar wounds for other families. Around 10 o'clock, exhaustion finally claimed Elena's excitement. She kissed Miguel's forehead and retreated to her bedroom, already planning tomorrow's outfit from her limited wardrobe. Miguel listened to her moving around, the familiar sounds of his granddaughter preparing for sleep, water running, drawers opening and closing, the squeak of her mattress springs. When silence finally settled over the house, Miguel's phone rang. The number was different this time, but he knew the caller before answering. His hands remained steady as he lifted the device to his ear. "Did you enjoy your celebration dinner?" Griselda's voice carried amusement and surveillance in equal measure. Pizza from Tony's, Elena's favorite since she was 12. Miguel didn't respond to the obvious demonstration of how closely they'd been watched. Instead, he walked to the front window and peered through the blinds at the street. A few parked cars, porch lights glowing, the Hernandez family's television flickering blue against their living room wall. Nothing obviously threatening, but then again, Griselda's people had always been ghosts. "The meeting tomorrow," he said quietly. "What exactly do you want?" "I want you to remember who you used to be, Miguel. Before you became a mechanic playing grandfather in this suburban wasteland." Her voice carried the weight of memory and calculation. "You were good at what you did, the best until greed made you stupid. That was a different man. Men don't change. They just get better at lying to themselves." Griselda's laugh was silk wrapped around razor wire. "But we'll see tomorrow. Isabel will evaluate whether you still possess the skills I require, or if 38 years of pretending to be normal have made you useless. And if I fail your evaluation, then Elena's scholarship will be revoked due to irregularities in her application. Academic fraud, perhaps, fabricated transcripts, the kind of accusations that follow a student for life, making them unemployable in their chosen field." Griselda paused, letting the threat settle. "Of course, there are other scholarships available, private foundations with less stringent oversight, some located in countries where bright young women simply disappear into research programs that serve specialized interests." The message was clear. Elena's future, her freedom, her safety, possibly her life, depended entirely on Miguel's cooperation. Griselda had crafted a perfect trap, using his granddaughter's dreams as both bait and leverage. 2 o'clock tomorrow," Griselda continued. "The Mayfair Hotel, penthouse suite. Come alone, but bring Elena. Isabel is very interested in meeting the girl whose academic potential has attracted such generous investment." Miguel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his old life settling back onto his shoulders like familiar armor. Tomorrow, he would walk into that hotel as Elena's protective grandfather, and emerge as something he'd spent decades trying to forget. The mechanic Miguel Santos was about to die, killed by the resurrection of the bodyguard who had once been Griselda Blanco's most trusted weapon. The war had begun, and his granddaughter was the battlefield. The line went dead, leaving Miguel staring at his reflection in the darkened window. Behind him, the house held the peaceful silence of Elena's sleep, but his mind raced through scenarios and escape routes with the tactical precision he'd thought buried forever. He could wake her now, throw their essentials in the truck, and drive north until they reached somewhere Griselda's reach couldn't follow. Canada, maybe. Or they could disappear into the Everglades, live off the grid like the Seminoles who'd never surrendered. But even as he considered it, Miguel knew running was pointless. If Griselda had found them here, she'd find them anywhere. The woman who'd built a cocaine empire from nothing didn't leave loose ends, and she certainly didn't forgive betrayal. The only reason they were still alive was because she wanted something more than simple revenge. Miguel moved through the house like a ghost, checking locks and windows with muscle memory that felt both foreign and familiar. The .38 revolver he kept in the kitchen drawer felt heavier than usual in his palm, inadequate. If Griselda's people came tonight, one gun wouldn't save them. Hell, an armory wouldn't save them. The photo albums on Elena's bookshelf mocked him with their normalcy. Birthday parties, school events, family dinners that had seemed so important just hours ago. In one picture, 8-year-old Elena sat on his shoulders at a carnival, cotton candy sticky on her fingers, both of them laughing at something Carlos had said. Miguel remembered that day with painful clarity. It was the last time his son had been clean, the last family outing before the pills took over completely. Now Elena was 18, brilliant, beautiful, and trapped in a web she didn't even know existed. Miguel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sweet dreams. Isabel, the foundation representative. the evaluation committee of one who would decide whether Miguel Santos still possessed the skills that had once made him invaluable to the most dangerous woman in Miami. He deleted the message, but the damage was done. They were watching. They were always watching. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams that felt more like memories. Griselda's laugh echoing through the Mutiny Hotel, the weight of his Uzi during the Dadland Mall shootout, the smell of cocaine and blood and expensive perfume that had defined his world for 15 years. In the dreams, Elena wore the white dress she'd chosen for graduation, but her face was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of the dead. Miguel woke at dawn with his hands around his throat, choking on silence. Elena was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and college brochures spread before her like tarot cards predicting a future that might not exist. She'd chosen her best outfit, black slacks and a white blouse from the church donation box, and attempted to tame her curls into something professional. She looked achingly young. "I've been thinking about my major," she said without looking up. "Pre-med is competitive. Maybe I should consider something more practical first. Business or—" "You'll study exactly what you want," Miguel interrupted, pouring coffee with hands that barely trembled. "Medicine, healing. Don't let anyone tell you to aim lower." Elena's smile could have broken his heart if there were any pieces left to break. "Thank you, abuelo, for everything. I know this is hard for you too, having me leave for college, starting over without Carlos." She reached across the table to squeeze his scarred knuckles. "But this scholarship changes everything. We can finally stop just surviving and start living." Miguel nodded, unable to trust his voice. Elena saw the scholarship as salvation. He knew it was damnation wrapped in academic letterhead. But she deserved these few hours of hope before the truth destroyed everything they'd built together. The morning crawled by with agonizing normalcy. Miguel opened the auto shop, told his assistant he'd be closing early for a family appointment, and pretended to work while his mind cataloged everything he knew about the Mayfair Hotel's security, exit routes, and sightlines. Old habits surfaced like muscle memory: where to position himself for maximum visibility, which escape routes offered the best odds, how to move through crowds while protecting Elena. At noon, he closed the shop and drove home to collect his granddaughter. She was waiting on the front steps, clutching a folder of academic transcripts and recommendation letters like a shield. The scholarship letter was folded carefully in her purse. Proof of legitimacy she had no reason to question. "Ready?" Miguel asked, though readiness was irrelevant. They were committed now, passengers on a collision course Griselda had been plotting for 38 years. Elena nodded, radiant with anticipation. "Ready?" As they drove toward downtown Miami, Miguel caught glimpses of cars that might be following, faces that seemed too familiar, patterns of surveillance he'd once been trained to recognize. But maybe paranoia was just another old habit, rusty but persistent. The Mayfair Hotel rose before them like a monument to wealth and power, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun in blinding fragments. Miguel parked across the street, studying the building while Elena checked her appearance in the visor mirror. Time to discover whether Miguel Santos was still capable of keeping Elena alive, or if 38 years of peace had made him just another old man with blood on his hands and no way to wash it clean. Miguel's hands gripped the steering wheel as he studied the Mayfair Hotel's entrance. 3 valets, 2 doormen, security cameras covering every angle. In his bodyguard days, he would have mapped 17 ways to breach this building and twice as many to escape. Now he was counting exits like a trapped animal. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, staring up at the gleaming tower. "I've never been in a place like this." That innocence carved another piece from Miguel's chest. Elena had grown up in a world of used car lots and discount groceries, where luxury meant pizza on Friday nights. She couldn't see what Miguel saw, that buildings like this were built on blood money, their marble lobbies purchased with the lives of people like her father. They crossed the street together, Elena's heels clicking against concrete with nervous energy. Miguel positioned himself between her and the traffic, old instincts screaming warnings about sniper angles and ambush points. The doorman's smile seemed genuine, but Miguel had once watched Griselda's lieutenant smile exactly like that while strangling an informant with piano wire. The lobby assault of wealth and power, crystal chandeliers, imported marble, the kind of tasteful extravagance that whispered money so old it had forgotten its own sins. Elena moved through it like a tourist, wide-eyed and careful not to touch anything that might cost more than their monthly rent. "Mr. Santos." A woman approached from the bank of elevators, her smile as sharp as her tailored suit. Mid-40s, expensive jewelry, the kind of understated elegance that took decades to perfect. "I'm Isabel Cortez, Senior Director of the Esperanza Foundation. You must be Elena." Isabel extended her hand to Miguel's granddaughter, and he watched for tells, the subtle evaluation of a predator sizing up prey, the quick glance that would catalog Elena's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Instead, Isabel seemed genuinely warm, asking about Elena's drive into the city and complimenting her academic achievements as they waited for the elevator. But Miguel knew better than to trust surfaces. Griselda had taught him that the most dangerous people were often the most charming. The elevator rose in silence, Elena clutching her folder of transcripts, while Isabel made small talk about the scholarship program's history. Miguel caught his reflection in the polished steel doors, a tired mechanic in his best shirt and work-worn hands, standing beside two women who belonged to different worlds entirely. He looked exactly like what he'd become, a grandfather out of his depth, grateful for his family's good fortune. It was a perfect disguise for what he used to be. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic beyond. Elena gasped at the sight, but Miguel's attention focused on the room's tactical elements. One entrance, no escape routes, windows too high for anything but suicide. They were trapped in an elegant cage. "Please sit," Isabel gestured to a leather sofa arranged around a coffee table set with fine china and pastries Elena would never dare touch. "I know this must feel overwhelming, but I want you both to understand how excited our foundation is about Elena's potential." As Isabel poured tea, Miguel studied her movements for weapons, signs of backup, anything that might indicate the trap's true nature. She moved with practiced grace, her manicured hands steady as she served them like honored guests, rather than prey. The performance was flawless. "Tell me about your academic interests, Elena," Isabel said, settling across from them with her own delicate cup. "Your essay about pursuing medicine to address addiction issues was particularly moving." Elena launched into her prepared speech about healing communities affected by drug violence, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her subject. Miguel watched his granddaughter describe her dreams with passionate conviction, unaware that she was speaking to representatives of the very forces that had created the problems she wanted to solve. The irony was suffocating. "Your grandfather must be very proud," Isabel said, turning those calculating eyes toward Miguel. "Raising a young woman of Elena's caliber couldn't have been easy, especially given your family's challenges." The pause held weight. Isabel knew about Carlos, about the overdose, about the debts Miguel had paid to keep drug dealers away from Elena. She knew everything, which meant Griselda had been watching them far longer than Miguel had imagined. "Elena's always been special," he managed, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "She gets her strength from her grandmother." "Ah yes, Rosa Santos. She passed when Elena was very young, didn't she?" Isabel's smile never wavered, but her eyes held a message Miguel understood perfectly. "We know about everyone you've ever loved." Elena blushed at the attention, answering Isabel's increasingly personal questions about her life, her goals, her relationships. Each response provided more ammunition for whatever game Griselda was playing, mapping the emotional landscape that could be weaponized against Miguel's cooperation. The afternoon sun shifted through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the suite as Isabel's questions grew more pointed, probing deeper into territory that made Miguel's trained instincts scream warnings his granddaughter couldn't hear. "Elena, darling," Isabel said, setting down her teacup with practiced precision, "would you mind stepping out to the balcony for a moment? I'd love for you to see the view while your grandfather and I discuss some administrative details about your scholarship disbursement." Elena practically glowed at being called darling by someone so sophisticated. Of course, she gathered her folder and moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, sliding open the glass door to step onto the wraparound terrace. Miguel watched his granddaughter disappear outside, every instinct screaming that he'd just lost his only leverage. But Isabel's smile remained warm, almost maternal, as she refreshed his tea. "She's remarkable," Isabel said, her voice carrying genuine admiration, so passionate about healing, about breaking cycles of violence and addiction. Griselda was right. Elena truly is special. "What do you want?" Miguel's question came out rougher than intended. "Direct. I appreciate that." Isabel leaned back, crossing her legs with casual elegance. "We want you to understand the gift you're being offered, Miguel. Not just Elena's education, but redemption. A chance to finally do something good with the skills that have haunted you for 38 years. By working for her again. By finishing what you started." Isabel's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "You see, there's something Griselda never told you about that night in 1985. Something that might change how you view your betrayal." Miguel's chest tightened. "She's dead. I saw the body." "You saw a body?" Isabel reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the coffee table between them. "Consuela Ramirez, 26, mother of 2. Cocaine addict, who bore a passing resemblance to Griselda after the right surgical modifications. She volunteered for the role in exchange for her children's safety and her parents' debt forgiveness." The envelope seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Miguel didn't want to touch it, didn't want to see what was inside, but his hands moved anyway. The photographs spilled across the coffee table like accusations, surveillance shots of the safe house, the preparation, the woman being coached on Griselda's mannerisms. And then the aftermath, the real aftermath. Consuela was already dying. Isabel continued conversationally. "Terminal cancer. The surgery to make her face match. Griselda's actually improved her final months. Better pain medication, private care. Her children received full scholarships to American universities. Everyone won." Miguel's hands trembled as he studied the images. The woman in the photos looked nothing like Griselda without the surgical alterations. Different bone structure, different height, different everything. But in the safe house that night, with the blood and chaos and his own guilt clouding his judgment, "You killed an innocent woman for nothing," Isabel said, and for the first time her mask of professional warmth slipped. "A mother who sacrificed herself to save her family." Does that feel familiar, Miguel? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Miguel had spent 38 years believing he'd betrayed Griselda, a murderous drug lord who'd killed hundreds. The guilt had been manageable because she'd deserved death. But Consuela Ramirez, "Griselda was never in that room," he whispered. "Oh, she was there, hidden in the panic room you never knew existed, watching through cameras as you stood aside and let her enemies murder an innocent woman in her place." Isabel's voice turned soft, almost gentle. "She saw everything, Miguel. Your face when you realized what you'd done. Your horror when you understood you'd been played by both sides." Miguel's vision blurred. The safe house, the setup, the way everything had gone too smoothly. It hadn't been because he'd given them inside information. It had been because Griselda had orchestrated the entire thing, using his betrayal as cover for her own disappearance. "She knew?" His voice broke on the words. "She knew I was going to accept money to betray her. Of course she knew. You think Griselda Blanco survived 15 years in the cocaine trade by trusting anyone completely?" Isabel laughed, and the sound was pure cruelty. "She had you followed, your finances monitored, your conversations recorded. She knew about Elena's medical bills, your son's debts, your desperate search for a way out. She was counting on your betrayal." The truth hit Miguel like a sledgehammer to the chest. He'd spent decades haunted by guilt over betraying a woman who'd been counting on his betrayal. Griselda had used his desperation against him, manipulating him into accepting blood money that had made him complicit in an innocent woman's murder. She played me. She played everyone. The rival cartels thought they were eliminating their biggest threat. You thought you were securing your family's future. Consuela thought she was saving her children. Isabel collected the photographs with clinical efficiency. Only Griselda won that night. Through the window, Elena stood at the balcony railing, her face bright with hope as she gazed out at the city she thought would soon welcome her as a medical student. She had no idea her grandfather had just learned he'd built their entire life on the grave of an innocent mother. "That's why she wants you back," Isabel continued. "Not for your skills as a bodyguard, but because you're the only person who truly understands the cost of underestimating her." Miguel stared at the photographs scattered across the coffee table, each image a nail in the coffin of his self-deception. Consuela Ramirez smiled back at him from a family portrait, gap-toothed children clinging to their mother, hope shining in eyes that would never see her again. "What does she want?" His voice sounded hollow, scraped clean of the righteous anger that had sustained him for 38 years. Isabel gathered the photographs with surgical precision, sliding them back into the envelope like evidence being filed away. "Justice. The other men who betrayed her that night have lived comfortable lives while she rebuilt her empire from the shadows. Now it's time to collect what they owe. And Elena is exactly what she appears to be, a brilliant young woman who deserves every opportunity this scholarship provides." Isabel's smile returned, but colder now, more calculating, assuming her grandfather makes the right choice. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Miguel could see Elena leaning against the balcony railing, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling her best friend Maria, sharing her excitement about the interview, about the future that seemed so bright from 30 floors above the city that had devoured her father. "You're asking me to become a killer again." "I'm asking you to become what you always were, Griselda's instrument of justice. The men who orchestrated that night didn't just betray her, Miguel. They betrayed you too, used your desperation to make you complicit in murder while they counted their blood money." Isabel leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Don't you want them to pay for what they did to you, to Consuela?" The names surfaced from memory like corpses rising from deep water. Detective Martinez, who'd provided inside information about police raids. Judge Castillo, who'd dismissed charges and sealed evidence. Banker Herrera, who'd laundered payments and hidden assets. They'd all taken Griselda's money while secretly negotiating her death, playing every side until they found the winning combination. Miguel had been their unwitting pawn, the insider who'd confirmed Griselda's location and security protocols. But they'd been Griselda's pawns too, feeding her intelligence about their own betrayal while she prepared her masterstroke. "They're all dead by now," he said. "Old men who are very much alive and enjoying their retirement." Isabel withdrew an iPad, swiping through surveillance photographs with practiced efficiency. Martinez lives in a Coral Gables mansion, his pension supplemented by 38 years of offshore investments. Castillo serves on 3 corporate boards, his legal expertise highly valued. Herrera opened a private wealth management firm that caters to discreet clients. Each photograph showed men in their 70s and 80s, gray-haired and soft around the middle, surrounded by wives and grandchildren and the fruits of their betrayal. They looked like any other successful retirees, their hands clean of blood that had long since washed away. "She wants me to kill them. She wants you to understand that consequences are patient things, that justice doesn't expire just because time passes." Isabel closed the iPad, her expression unreadable. "What you do with that understanding is your choice." Miguel's hands found his coffee cup, the delicate china trembling against his scarred fingers. 38 years of peace had softened him, made him believe he could escape the gravitational pull of violence that had defined his youth. But sitting in this elegant cage, surrounded by the ghosts of his failures, he felt the familiar weight of purpose settling around his shoulders like an old coat. Elena's laughter drifted through the glass doors, bright and innocent and utterly oblivious to the choices being made on her behalf. She deserved better than a grandfather who'd built their life on borrowed time and borrowed money, better than a legacy of cowardice and compromise. "There's something else," Isabel said, her voice cutting through his spiral of guilt. "Something about Carlos that might interest you." Miguel's head snapped up. "Leave my son out of this." His overdose wasn't accidental. Isabel's words hit like physical blows. Judge Castillo's grandson deals fentanyl through the university network. Herrera's bank processes the payments. Martinez's connections ensure the dealers stay protected. They've built an empire on addiction, Miguel. They killed your son just as surely as if they'd injected the needle themselves. The revelation should have destroyed him. Instead, it crystallized everything into sharp, terrible clarity. Carlos hadn't been a casualty of his own weakness. He'd been murdered by the same men who'd used Miguel's desperation to orchestrate an innocent woman's death. Elena appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement. "Abuelo, you have to see this view. It's like the whole world spread out below us." Miguel looked at his granddaughter, brilliant and hopeful and standing on the precipice of a future purchased with blood, and felt something cold and familiar awakening in his chest. "We need to discuss terms," he told Isabel quietly. "I thought you might." Isabel's satisfied smile told Miguel everything about how predictable his response had been. She'd orchestrated this revelation with surgical precision, saving Carlos for the final blow because she knew exactly how a grandfather's love could be weaponized against his conscience. "Elena, mi amor," Miguel called toward the balcony, his voice steady despite the earthquake reshaping his world. "Come inside. We're finished here." "Already?" Elena's disappointment was audible as she slid the glass door closed behind her. "But I haven't even gotten to ask about the research opportunities, or the mentorship program, or—" "You'll have plenty of time for questions later," Isabel interjected smoothly, rising to collect her materials. "Your grandfather and I have covered all the essential details." Miguel watched Elena's face cycle through confusion and concern as she registered the tension crackling between the adults. His granddaughter wasn't naive. 18 years in their neighborhood had taught her to read dangerous undercurrents. But she was innocent enough to believe those dangers couldn't touch her in a penthouse suite discussing her bright future. "Is everything okay?" Elena asked, clutching her folder against her chest like a shield. "Did I do something wrong?" "You're perfect," Miguel said, and meant it. "This isn't about you." Isabel gathered her purse and iPad with practiced efficiency. "I'll be in touch within 48 hours with the scholarship disbursement schedule and your grandfather's consulting contract details." She extended her hand to Elena first. "It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you, dear. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished." Elena shook the offered hand, still radiating confusion, but maintaining the polite facade Miguel had drilled into her since childhood. "Thank you for the opportunity, Miss Cortez. I promise I won't disappoint you." "I'm certain you won't." Isabel turned to Miguel, her handshake lingering a fraction too long. "I look forward to our collaboration." After Isabel departed, Elena paced the penthouse suite like a caged animal, her nervous energy filling the space between the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Abuelo, what was that really about? The way she looked at you, the things you weren't saying—" "Sit down, mija." Something in his tone made Elena freeze. Miguel had used that voice exactly twice in her life, when explaining her father's death, and when teaching her what to do if strangers ever tried to take her from school. It was his voice for terrible truths that couldn't be softened. Elena sank onto the leather sofa, where Isabel had delivered her careful manipulations. "You're scaring me." Miguel joined her, his weathered hands finding hers with surprising gentleness. Through the massive windows, Miami sprawled below them, a city built on cocaine money and corruption, where men like Martinez and Castillo and Herrera had transformed blood into respectability, while women like Consuela Ramirez paid the price for their ambition. "Before you were born, before your father got sick, I worked for very dangerous people," Miguel began. "I thought I'd left that life behind when you came to live with me. But the past, it has a way of finding you." Elena's grip tightened on his fingers. "What kind of dangerous people?" "The kind who never forgive and never forget." Miguel studied his granddaughter's face, memorizing her expression before innocence gave way to the terrible knowledge he was about to share. "The scholarship is real, but it comes with conditions, obligations I thought I'd never have to face again." "What kind of obligations?" Miguel looked out at the city where he'd spent 15 years protecting a woman who'd turned his loyalty into complicity, who'd orchestrated his betrayal to serve her own survival. Somewhere down there, Griselda was waiting for his answer, confident in her understanding of his character. She knew exactly what a grandfather would do to protect his family's future. She was counting on his love becoming another weapon in her arsenal. "The kind that could destroy everything we've built together," Miguel said finally. or secure your future in ways I never imagined possible. Elena studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for organic chemistry textbooks. And if you refuse these obligations? Miguel thought about Consuelo Ramirez's children, now successful adults who'd never learned their mother died wearing another woman's face, about Carlos, poisoned by the same network that had orchestrated Miguel's original betrayal, about Elena's scholarship disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, taking her dreams with it. Then we go home, he said. Back to the garage, back to scraping together community college tuition, back to hoping your brilliance is enough to overcome everything this world will throw at you. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing patterns across his scarred knuckles. And if you accept? Miguel felt the weight of 40 years settling around his shoulders, the muscle memory of violence, the cold calculations that had kept Griselda alive through countless assassination attempts, the terrible clarity that came with embracing what he'd always been underneath the careful disguise of respectability. Then I become someone you might not recognize, he said. Someone I swore I'd never be again. Elena lifted their joined hands, pressing her lips to his knuckles in a gesture of forgiveness he didn't deserve. Then, we'd better make sure it's worth it, she whispered. 3 years later, Miguel stood in the same auto shop where this story had begun, his hands black with engine grease and his back aching from hours bent over a transmission. The afternoon sun slanted through the open bay doors exactly as it had that first day Elena received her scholarship letter, but everything else had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Elena's voice drifted from the small office where she worked between classes, explaining organic chemistry concepts to a struggling classmate over video chat. She was in her 3rd year at the University of Miami now, her grades exemplary, her research on addiction treatment protocols already catching attention from pharmaceutical companies. The scholarship money flowed seamlessly each semester, no questions asked, no strings visible to anyone except Miguel. The price had been paid in blood, as all debts to Griselda ultimately were. Martinez had died first, a heart attack in his Coral Gables mansion that the coroner attributed to his age and lifestyle. Judge Castillo followed 6 months later, a stroke during his morning tennis game that surprised no one who knew his family history. Herrera lasted the longest, perhaps sensing the pattern, but even private security couldn't protect him from the cancer that consumed him with methodical efficiency. Miguel had pulled each trigger himself, using skills he'd hoped to forget and methods that left no evidence behind. Each death had been designed to look natural, the kind of inevitable endings that claimed men in their 70s and 80s every day. The police never investigated. The families never suspected. The city never mourned 3 old men who'd lived too long on borrowed time and borrowed money. Justice, Griselda had called it. Miguel called it something else. The bell above the shop entrance chimed, and Miguel looked up to find Detective Rivera approaching, the same cop who'd investigated Carlos's overdose 3 years ago. The man looked older now, grayer, carrying the weight of cases that never quite closed the way they should. Miguel Santos? Rivera extended his hand, his grip firm but cautious. I don't know if you remember me. I remember. Miguel wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag, studying the detective's face for signs of suspicion or knowledge. What can I do for you? It's about your son's case. Carlos Rivera pulled out a notebook, its pages worn from handling. I know this might be difficult, but we've had some developments in the investigation of the dealers who supplied the fentanyl. Miguel's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Developments? The network collapsed about 18 months ago. Key players died or disappeared, money dried up, whole operation just ended. Rivera flipped through his notes. Funny thing is, it happened right around the time 3 prominent community figures passed away from natural causes. Men who had connections to various criminal enterprises over the years. The detective's eyes met Miguel's, and something passed between them, an understanding that lived in the space between law and justice, between what could be proven and what was known. Justice works in mysterious ways, Miguel said carefully. That it does. Rivera closed his notebook, sliding it back into his jacket. I wanted you to know that the people who poisoned your son won't be hurting anyone else's children, Sometimes that's the best closure we can hope for. After the detective left, Miguel returned to the transmission, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, while his mind wandered through the landscape of choices that had brought him to this moment. Elena would graduate in 2 years with a degree that would open doors to medical schools across the country. The scholarship fund had already indicated their willingness to support her through residency and beyond. The cost of her future was measured in graves Miguel visited on quiet Sunday mornings, leaving flowers for Consuela Ramirez and seeking forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. He'd killed 3 men to secure his granddaughter's dreams, and he'd kill 3 more if necessary. The certainty of that truth no longer kept him awake at night. Elena emerged from the office as closing time approached, her face bright with the satisfaction of a successful tutoring session. "Ready to head home, abuelo?" Miguel nodded, beginning the ritual of closing the shop, lowering bay doors, turning off lights, setting alarms that protected the honest life he'd built on foundations of calculated violence. As they walked to his truck, Elena slipped her arm through his with the casual affection that had sustained him through years of moral compromise. "You know what I realized today?" she said, settling into the passenger seat. "I can trace every good thing in my life back to the day you decided to raise me instead of letting child services take over. Every opportunity, every chance, every door that's opened. It all started with that choice." Miguel started the engine, his scarred hands steady on the wheel as they drove away from the shop, where he'd learned to accept that love and violence sometimes walked hand in hand. In the rearview mirror, Miami glittered with promise and corruption, a city that had taught him the true cost of protecting the people who mattered most. Some prices were worth paying, some debts could only be settled with blood, and some stories stayed with you forever, carved into your bones like scars that never quite healed but eventually stopped hurting. The setting sun painted everything golden, and Miguel drove home to the life he'd bought with choices that would haunt him until the day he died. Choices he'd make again without hesitation, because love was the most dangerous loyalty of all.